Hello everyone and welcome. So in this tutorial I'm going to be breaking down some of the parts of this procedural pizza material in cups. If you want to have access to the full scene, you can download it from my Patreon, but I will break down the most interesting parts. So yeah, let's get into it. So we will start from the beginning. The first thing I did was to play around with the crust material and the displacements to have this rounded look. And the way I'm doing that, I start with the ring, play with the size, convert it to the SDF to a mono, and also smooth it a little bit so I can have that typical rounded look. And I can connect this to a preview material and connect this to the height. Let's right away play with the size, 0.01, change this to grid, divisions to 500, and let's see how that looks. So as you can see, it doesn't look like much. I need to increase this to 0.1, let's say. And as you can see, this will give us this pointy shape, which is not ideal. So the way I'm solving that is by blurring, but as you can see, it will blur everything. Then I blend it with minimum mode with the original texture, and I get this sort of result, and then I just blur it a little bit more and I get the desired result. If I increase this a little bit to 0.2, you start to see the results. So it's not perfect, but it was the way I found to create this rounded look while keeping some sort of sharp corners. Then I'm also distorting this shape, so I'm creating this distortion, but I don't want the effect on the interior to be the same as the exterior part, so I'm creating a mask in here to change the scale of the distortion. And if we look at the final result, it will look something along those lines. And then I'm also adding some breaks on the crust, and it's funny how I did that. I started with this asterisk shape, which thinking about it doesn't make much sense to use these in any project, but in this case it was useful. So converting it to mono, blending with some noise, eroding it a little bit, transforming it and distorting it, and then when we blend it with the original shape we get this sort of result, which will look something like this. In this case it will look too random, but when blended over the blurred result and the other materials, it will look something like this. So as you can see in here, it will have these breaks on the crust, which was the sort of look I was after. So the most challenging part was definitely the leaves. So these leaves that go on the pizza, and I'm gonna be breaking down how I did that. So I'm creating them in SOPs, and this is the powerful thing about COPs, that you can combine it with the other parts of Houdini, in this case SOPs, and then rasterizing it to create the materials in COPs. So I'm starting with a line, resampling and creating the curve view attribute, then deforming it to a leaf shape, but just by setting the normals and deforming it along the normals, play with the ramp, mirroring, and from here I'm creating a polypath to unify the shape, polyfill it to have some geometry, and adding some normals, and then removing the curve. So this is the leaf base, and for the lines, I'm just copying to points a few lines. First of all, I'm carving a little bit the top and bottom, so I can control the position of the veins, let's say. Then resampling it, and in here I'm setting the normals, and let's have a look how I did that. Basically, I'm creating the normals between 1 and -1 in the x-axis, and also creating the app attribute the same way, so I can rotate it later. And it's really simple. We just use the modulo, so we have 0 and 1 repeating, and then scale it, multiply it by 2, and subtract 1 to have a 0 centered offset, so -1 and 1. This way it will alternate between the points -1 and 1. Then I'm doing an attribute adjust factor and rotating randomly the normals along the app attribute. As you can see, that's why it was important to create that app attribute. And then just playing with the p-scale, and we get this sort of result. If I can hide here the normals. And then we can reproject it to the leaf mesh, as you can see, to create the veins, resampling it. And I'm also creating some vectors in here with the cross product, so I can deform it down along the curve view, as you can see in here. And then we can resample it again to have less points, and resampling a less time, and set it to subdivision curves, and we get this sort of result. So this is a very basic leaf, but that will work for our purpose. I also did something here. So after getting the interior part of the leaves, I'm creating after remeshing also the leaf, I am creating a nearpoint group, and along with the unshared. So in here I'm combining the two groups, so I can create a mask to play with the interior parts of the leaf. As you can see in here, if I normalize the attribute, you can see the result. And I'm doing that by using the surface distance function. We covered that before. We start with the group of points, and then we measure the distance between the group and the interior part. Then we do an attribute blur, and we have everything we need for our stamping or our rasterization, let's say. So I'm rasterizing here the alpha, which will be just the leaf, and the leaf interior, because I also have an attribute set in there, as you can see in here, leaf interior, and also the surface distance. As you can see, this will help us to create that bump effect on the interior parts of the leaf. Creating the color, and I'm applying a distortion to both to all the shapes, and also creating some noises for the shading. And I'm applying the distort to all the attributes, so I can stamp them within the same position and still have access to them, as you can see. That way I can blend the different layers later for the shading and the displacement also. So as you can see in here, if I check the stamp, we have the stamp, we have the final result, but if I look at the ID, we have a different ID for the interior part. That way I can come in here we have. So if I check this compare, I gave the ID of the interior part, the veins, an ID of 999. So I can isolate that with a compare, and then we can just blend in that attribute. So that's basically how I've done those leaves. Then I also created some curling on the leaves, or some bend. As you can see, they are not flat. And the way I'm doing that is by extracting the UVs that we have in here. Let's see. So we have here the UVs. And then in here I am creating a ramp from the UVs with this inverted hill ramp, and then I just blend it over our displacement map. So in this case I am blending them in here. As you can see, I'm multiplying over the leaf shape to have that curling effect. So yeah, that's mainly how I created the leaves. Hopefully you got some tips out of this, and let's move on. So now I wanted to show you how I created the cloth material, which on itself is quite boring, but it can show us a feature or two about the scope's workflow. So let's look first at this top import, where I'm creating the points to do the stamping. So I'm starting with a grid with 4 primitives, and if you look at the primitive numbers, we have 0, 1, 3, 2. So I want these in a circular pattern, so I can iterate over each two sections, each two primitives, and create the stamp attribute, so we can overlay different colors in cops. So first of all, I'm sorting them in a circular pattern. The way I'm doing that is just by reversing the primitive order of the second and third primitives, so 0, 1, 2, 3. Then I'm doing a for each, how is it called? For each count? For each number. For each number, and I'm setting these to 4 iterations since I want 4 sections out of this grid. Then in a group range, I'm selecting 2 primitives out of 4, and as an offset, I'm using the for each count, the iteration attribute, as you can see in here. And these will iterate over each 2 sets of primitives. then blasting those isolated primitives in the group range, extracting the centroid, and here I'm setting the stamp attribute to be the iteration attribute, as you can see. And we will have 0, 1, 2, and 3. So after each iteration. And this will merge the points, so we will have 8 points. And now in here we can do the stamping. And I'm stamping, the first stamp will be, the first and last stamp will be this white color, and the second and third will be this blue. And if we set it to default, we will have this sort of result, but with unsorted depth weighted over, we get this blending effect of the different stamps. And then we can move it to the center by translating in X and Y 0.5, and then just repeat it with the uniform scale transform, as you can see. And finally, we can add some noise over the top, some noise that is scaled along the X, as you can see. And so the main takeaway is this stamp ID that we can blend with this. As you can see, we can change in here the blending and get different results. So yeah, that's how I created the cloth material. And other than that, if you are interested in this full scene, you can check it out on my Patreon, how I did the normals and everything, but I believe I showed you the most interesting parts. You can look in there how I did the slicing of the pizza, because I'm also creating that in SOPs and then blending over the... We can actually go over that. So in this case, to do the slicing, I'm starting with a circle, which is quite dense in divisions, but it's a number that we can divide easily. And then doing a class attribute in here to divide it by 8. Blasting the part I want. In this case I can change the piece. In this case I chose 5. Remove the unshared and doing a basic inset so I can have an attribute to play with in cops. So that's basically how I've done that slicing. Then in here I'm isolating that slice and isolating the rest, transforming the slice and blending it over. And this is how it looks, the final albedo texture, as you can see. So yeah, a lot of work. It looks somewhat decent. Again, if you are interested in the material, check out my Patreon, where you can find lots of tutorials, exclusive tutorials, courses, and all the project files from my videos. Let me know in the comments if you found these useful, and I guess I'll see you next time. Thank you.